Clarissa stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, modeling the second of two hiking outfits. Both were some variation of leggings and fleece, but this one had brighter colors. She turned sideways, pulled at the fabric near her hip, then looked over at me without meeting my eyes. "So," she said, brushing her fingers through her hair, "which one says, 'I'm so over it,' without screaming it?" I didn't answer right away. I watched her instead, the way she posed, the way she smirked like nothing mattered. She had this talent for pretending she didn't see the walls cracking. But I wasn't here to perform anymore. "That's the one," I finally said. "Definitely says you've moved on." She laughed like it was a joke. "Perfect. Exactly the vibe I want. Strong, fun, adventurous, you know? Strong, fun, adventurous. And not invited." "I still haven't heard you say who else is going," I said, my voice calm. She reached for her lipstick, twisting it open like she had all the time in the world. "You know who's going. It's just Morgan and a few of his friends from the conservation group. You wouldn't know them." "I know Morgan." Clarissa paused mid-swipe, her gaze still focused on the mirror. "Oh, please. You're not still stewing about that dinner party, are you? It had been 7 months ago. A Friday night. Wine, laughter, Clarissa glowing in the way she always did around people who flattered her. And Morgan, tall, smug, dressed like he'd just returned from hiking Machu Picchu, leaning across the table to say, 'Roman, you're like a reliable sedan. Dependable. Solid. Safe.'" He said it like a compliment, and Clarissa laughed like it was the truth. "That wasn't the first time you let him say that," I said. She shrugged. "Well, you kind of are, Roman." I watched her put the finishing touch on her lipstick, slow and deliberate. Her mouth curled up as she pressed her lips together. The lipstick was called something ridiculous, Bold Whisper, or Crimson Clarity. I had seen the receipt once. She turned to face me now. "So what? You want to pick a fight because I'm going on a hike with a guy who's been in my life longer than you've known how to make pasta al dente?" "I'm not picking a fight," I said. "I'm giving you a choice." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I stood. "You go on that trip with him? I'm done." Clarissa tilted her head like I'd said something in a different language. "Done with what? Sulking? Pretending you care where I go?" "Done," I repeated. "With this. With you. With the part where I keep pretending this marriage is something we're both in." She crossed her arms and gave a breathy laugh, like I was just being dramatic. "Roman, come on. This is just a trek. You're not seriously—" I didn't say anything else. I let the silence answer for me. Clarissa stared at me, waiting for me to backpedal, to soften, to say I didn't mean it. But I did. I meant every word. She turned back to the mirror and ran her fingers through her hair again. "Well, that's a hell of a tantrum." "No tantrum," I said. "Just the quiet before the storm." She scoffed. "Whatever, I'm not canceling the trip." I nodded. "I know." Then I picked up my book and left the room, leaving her with her neon windbreaker and her confident grin. She didn't know it yet, but the game she thought she was winning had just ended, and I wasn't planning to play anymore. The morning Clarissa left, she didn't even say goodbye. She moved through the kitchen with her usual bounce, a protein bar in one hand, sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown. She hummed something under her breath, probably Florence plus The Machine, her go-to Empowered Woman playlist. I sat at the counter, drinking black coffee and reading the same paragraph of the paper over and over again. "Car's coming in 10, she said, glancing at her phone. "I'll text you when we land in Portland." I didn't respond. She shot me a look, then peeled the wrapper off the bar and took a dramatic bite. "Okay, Roman, I get it. You're making a point. Very stoic, very Greek tragedy. If I get eaten by a mountain lion, you can say, 'I told you so.'" Still, I said nothing. She grabbed her duffel bag, then paused by the front door, fishing out a tube of lip balm. "Don't wait up," she said with a smirk. I took another sip of my coffee and nodded once, just enough to let her know I'd heard her. She gave an exaggerated sigh, then walked out, the door clicking shut behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. The silence after she left wasn't sad. It was clean. Sharp. I didn't sit there long. Once I heard the rideshare pull away from the curb, I stood and walked into my study, the only room in the house she never really touched. From the bottom drawer of my locked filing cabinet, I pulled out a thick gray folder labeled in neat, small handwriting, Blueprint X. It had been in the works for almost a year. Not because I had planned for revenge, I didn't. I just planned for options, and Clarissa, whether she knew it or not, had helped make those options possible by ignoring every sign that I was still paying attention. Inside the folder were everything I needed: notarized documents for trust restructuring signed months ago, a severance outline for all joint assets, itemized down to the cookware, a deed transfer already recorded under a quiet holding company. No emotion, no drama, just legal precision. I made 2 calls. The first was to Lawrence, my old college roommate turned estate lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "You finally pulling the ripcord?" he asked, no hello needed. "It's time." "Got it. I'll activate the sequence. Give me 48 hours. The second call was to Mia, my goddaughter. She picked up immediately, breathless and cheerful as always. "Roman, what's the occasion?" "I need a favor. Quiet one." "Oh, cryptic." I love it already. She had always been a little too blunt for Clarissa's taste. Judgy, Clarissa once called her, after Mia called out her tendency to interrupt and dismiss people. I always appreciated Mia's honesty. "I'm moving some things around. Might need to forward a few things through you." "No problem," she said. "Want me to keep an eye on social too?" "Exactly." "Done." "Oh, and Roman?" "Yeah." I never liked her, not even a little. I smiled. Noted. When I hung up, I placed the folder on the desk and stared at it for a moment. This wasn't reaction. This was architecture. Every piece of the structure had been measured, tested, filed. Clarissa thought silence meant surrender. She thought my stillness was a passive shrug, but stillness, real stillness, was strategy. She had just made her final move. Now it was my turn. 3 days into her trek, Clarissa posted a photo. Mia forwarded it to me without comment, just a screenshot and a timestamp. The caption read, "Here's to never plateauing, Warstore Summit Squad, Oshbar high vibes only." In the photo, Clarissa was standing on some cliff ledge, all neon gear and reflective sunglasses, holding a tin camping cup like it was champagne. She had her signature half smile, the one she used when she wanted the world to think she was both carefree and completely in control. Her hair was tied back in a braid, and her cheeks were sun-kissed in that calculated influencer kind of way. Next to her was Morgan. Of course. He had one of those eco ponchos on and was holding up his own cup like they'd just made it to the moon. Predictable. But I didn't care about Morgan. What caught my eye was the reflection in Clarissa's sunglasses. It was faint, just the upper corner of the lenses, but clear enough. There was a third man sitting at a small picnic table, angled toward her. His hand rested on hers, fingers curved around her wrist in a way that didn't scream platonic. On his wrist was a silver dive watch, not Morgan's, and certainly not mine. There was an open bottle of red wine on the table, 2 glasses partially full. The same Malbec Clarissa always claimed gave her headaches. "Too acidic," she used to say, scrunching her nose whenever I ordered it. In the image, though, she was mid-toast, her fingers curved delicately around the stem. The tent behind them was zipped closed. A lantern hanging from a branch cast soft yellow light over the scene. The whole thing looked like a magazine ad. Rustic intimacy, curated wilderness. Except, it wasn't for the world. It wasn't even for me. Clarissa hadn't tagged anyone in the photo. No geotags, no names. She'd cropped it just right. Except for the glasses. She didn't see what she'd let slip, but I did. I saved the image, not out of anger, not for leverage, just for confirmation. Like when an engineer stress tests a bridge and hears the steel groan. Not breaking yet, but bending in ways it shouldn't. That was the moment I knew. It had never really been about Morgan. He was just the cover. What Clarissa wanted wasn't connection, it was admiration, applause, a rotating audience to tell her she glowed, that she was effortless, free, wild. She wanted to be watched, but I was done watching. She mistook my restraint for indifference, thought my silence was weakness. What she didn't know was that while she was toasting a new summit, I was already disassembling the scaffolding beneath the one she lived on. I closed the screenshot, opened my encrypted cloud folder, and added it to a file named Final Build. Then I closed my laptop and turned off my phone. I didn't need updates. Clarissa's performance was over. The house of cards had collapsed. The apartment was tucked away on a quiet street in North Portland. Nothing flashy, just a clean corner unit above a florist and an old tailor shop. I'd bought it 6 years ago, under a holding trust. Clarissa knew about the property in the abstract, but never asked questions. It wasn't the kind of place she cared to know about. No exposed beams, no skyline views, no curated photo ops. I arrived just after noon, the summer light slanting through the blinds. The place was freshly cleaned, staged with minimal furniture I'd ordered months ago in anticipation of this very moment. A small love seat in soft gray. A round kitchen table with 2 chairs, a single orchid on the windowsill, and in the entryway, a bowl of citrus oil nestled inside a ceramic diffuser, just enough to give the place that faint, clean, bright scent Clarissa always said, made her think of hotels for grown-ups. At exactly 12:15, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tilda standing there, right on time. She was in her mid-50s with straight shoulders and the kind of calm that comes from living through enough storms to stop fearing thunder. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and she wore simple black flats, a blue linen blouse, and carried a plain leather bag. She stepped inside without hesitation. "Smells nice," she said, looking around the space like she already lived there. I handed her the keys, 2 identical ones on a ring, no tags, no identifiers. "You remember the rules?" I asked. She nodded. Discretion, professionalism, silence. That's it. She didn't smile, but her eyes flicked toward mine with the faintest warmth. "I've done this before, Roman. You don't need to explain." I handed her the lease, 3 pages, signed and dated. It was structured through the trust, no paper trail leading back to me directly. Rent was a symbolic figure, mostly for legal formality. Tilda signed without reading it twice. "Any furniture you don't like, feel free to store it in the 2nd bedroom," I told her. "There's a secure storage closet in the basement." She glanced toward the hallway. "This is more than enough. I left a fresh phone line in the kitchen drawer. Just a flip phone, forwarded number. Mia will text you only if something needs to be relayed." She nodded once. "Understood." We didn't talk long after that. Tilda wasn't one for small talk, which I appreciated. Before I left, I paused in the doorway, watching her adjust a chair by 2 inches and straighten a picture frame. There was something steady about her presence. Not maternal, not cold, just still. "Thank you," I said quietly. Tilda looked up. "Don't thank me. You're the one setting the table." I left without another word, locking the door behind me with a quiet click. Clarissa wouldn't look for me here. Not yet. Not until everything else she thought was permanent had vanished. And by the time she figured out this apartment existed, it wouldn't matter. The address was no longer hers. The life inside it never had been. Clarissa came back early, 2 days ahead of schedule actually, suntanned, smug, and freshly exfoliated. She pulled up in the driveway with a duffel bag slung across her chest and her phone already up to her ear, mid-conversation with someone, laughing that forced, overly bright laugh she used when she wanted people nearby to know she was fine. Better than fine, thriving. She didn't notice the curtains, not at first. She went for the keypad first, her old reflex, tapping in the same code we'd used for years. Our anniversary, backwards. She punched it in, then again slower, then stepped back, confused. Code denied. I watched from 2 blocks down, parked in my car behind tinted windows. Not out of cruelty, just to confirm. To be absolutely sure the door no longer recognized her. Clarissa tried the key next. She fished it out, flipped it in her palm, like maybe the lock was the problem. Maybe something had stuck, or shifted. But when she slid it in and turned, nothing moved. She froze. I could see the exact moment her stomach dropped. That sharp inhale, that tilt of the head when reality catches up to entitlement. She called my number, straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Same result. Her voice, when she left the first message, was light. "Hey, Roman, the keypad's acting weird. Can you reset it from the app?" By the second message, she'd lost the casual tone. "Okay, this isn't funny. Where are you?" On the 3rd try, she didn't speak. Just silence. Maybe waiting to hear background noise. Maybe just hoping I'd pick up and smooth this out like always. She stepped back from the door and looked up at the 2nd floor window. And that's when she saw them. New curtains, simple, soft gray, not ours. She tried to call Mia. That was expected. Mia answered. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the timing. Mia would have said it plainly. Talk to the new occupant. Clarissa stared at her phone for a long second, then looked back at the house. No, at the home that was no longer hers. She walked around to the side and rang the bell. Twice. A moment later, the door opened. Tilda stood in the entryway, calm, composed, not a hair out of place. She wore the same linen blouse, flats, and that faint expression of someone who's already done the math and doesn't plan to explain it. Clarissa blinked at her. What the hell is going on? Tilda didn't flinch. You'll need to speak with your attorney. Everything's been filed, signed, and sealed. Clarissa blinked again, then laughed once, short and disbelieving. Are you serious right now? Who are you? Tilda smiled politely, not kindly. The tenant. Clarissa's mouth opened, then closed. This is my house, she snapped. No, Tilda said, voice even. It was yours, but not anymore. Clarissa took a step forward, like she might try to push her way in, but Tilda didn't move. She didn't need to. The quiet behind her was enough. A silence Clarissa didn't recognize, didn't control. This is insane, Clarissa said. Roman can't just... But the door was already closing. Click. She stood there for another few seconds, staring at the wood, her mouth still moving without sound. Then she turned, walked back down the path, and stood on the curb with her arms folded tight across her chest. She was finally locked out, not by accident, not by glitch, but by design. Clarissa had expected confrontation, a fight. A door slammed in anger, but I didn't give her that. I gave her absence. And in that, she finally understood what it meant to be replaced. The envelope arrived 2 days later, thick, heavy, cream-colored, no return address, just her name printed neatly on the front, underlined in dark ink. It was hand-delivered by courier to Mia's apartment, where Clarissa had been staying since the lockout. Mia told me later that Clarissa opened it while standing over the kitchen sink like the paper inside might bite. She peeled back the flap slowly, cautiously, as if still hoping it was just a formality. Maybe an apology. Maybe some half-step toward reconciliation. It wasn't. Inside was a letter from my legal executor, 6 pages of fine print and polite devastation, a full audit of all jointly held assets, retroactively restructured. The contents had been quietly shifted 2 days before she zipped up her hiking pack. Every clause was airtight, every account listed with dates and signatures, all legally binding, the trust, no longer shared, the house, sold, funds absorbed into a holding group, proceeds distributed into protected channels. The investment account she never bothered to understand, liquidated and reassigned. Even the little things, the wine club subscription she used as her personal sommelier, the airport lounge access she never paid for, the second parking space she insisted on claiming even though she didn't drive, gone. Clarissa sat on the edge of the sofa, flipping pages with trembling fingers, trying to find the loophole, the line break, the misspelled name. There wasn't one. She reread the second page 3 times, blinking as the weight of it sank in. She had been edged out of everything, not with spite, but with silence, not in reaction, but by design. Mia said she didn't speak for almost 15 minutes. She just stared at the final page, the one that listed all the dates the documents had been finalized, all of them aligned in quiet symmetry, signed during the weeks Clarissa was busy ordering gear, sharing Pinterest boards, and planning treks with people who barely knew her last name. That's when she pulled out her phone and scrolled to the picture, the one from the trip. There it was, her caption, "Here's to never plateauing." She whispered it aloud, this time with no audience, no filters, no reflection to hide behind. It hit differently now. Clarissa had always assumed consequences were emotional, yelling, slamming doors, tears. She never imagined they'd come in manila envelopes. She never thought punishment could arrive so quietly. Not as revenge, but as redirection. No mess. No spectacle. Just a clean withdrawal. Her recklessness hadn't been punished. It had been anticipated, and everything she assumed she owned had already slipped through her fingers before she even zipped up her suitcase. Clarissa once called me safe, a reliable sedan. She forgot that the safest vehicles come with airbags, reinforced steel, and quiet systems that deploy only when needed. Now she understood. Stillness isn't surrender. It's preparation. Clarissa drove past the house 3 times before stopping. It looked the same on the outside. Same trim, same fence. Even the same mailbox she always said looked too suburban. But something felt off. Different. She parked 2 houses down and walked the rest of the way, her heart pounding in that way it did when she was 10 seconds from saying something she hadn't rehearsed. From the sidewalk, she could see the garden. That's what made her stop. Roman was out there, knees in the dirt, gloves on, trimming back the lavender that always leaned too far over the walkway. Beside him was another figure, older, steady, precise. Tilda, wearing sun sleeves and a wide-brimmed hat, her hands deep in the soil, humming quietly to herself. As she tucked fresh basil seedlings into a raised bed Clarissa had once said was too much like a Home Depot commercial. There was no shouting, no tension, just a rhythm, slow, unhurried, domestic. Clarissa stood there frozen. She hadn't seen Roman in weeks, not since the door refused her and the silence replaced their marriage. Now, here he was, tending a life she was supposed to return to. She marched across the lawn, dirt kicking up under her heels. "You moved her in?" Roman didn't look up right away. He was trimming a marigold stem, slow and careful. He clipped once, then twice, then set the shears down gently on the brick edge of the garden bed. Then he stood. "She signed a lease," he said. Clarissa blinked. "A lease?" Roman nodded. "You remember those. You used to skim them." She looked past him at Tilda, who was still crouched in the dirt, quietly pulling weeds like this conversation didn't involve her. Like she'd heard worse and stayed anyway. Clarissa scoffed. "This is pathetic. You're replacing me with a woman who wears orthopedic shoes and buys her clothes in sets?" Roman didn't blink. "You said that once," he replied. "About my ex. You called her boring. Said she dressed like a school administrator." Clarissa crossed her arms. "And? That's when I knew," he said, voice calm. "Boring stays." Tilda looked up for the first time, her face unreadable. Then she returned to her basil. Clarissa felt the sting rise in her chest. The air caught sharp in her lungs. "You're seriously doing this?" she said. "You're actually planting herbs and smiling like this is normal?" Roman turned back to the bed, picked up the watering can, and tipped it gently over the soil. "This is normal," he said. "This is what you never noticed because you were always posing for something else." She clenched her jaw. "You're trying to punish me, make me feel replaced." Roman shook his head. "Number? I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in peace." "Peace," she repeated, her voice rising. "With her?" Roman didn't answer. He just knelt again, adjusting the stake on a young tomato vine. Clarissa stood there a second longer, arms crossed, looking down at the man who used to orbit around her moods, the man who now had dirt on his knees and no need to explain himself. The silence was worse than shouting. Tilda didn't say a word. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look her in the eye. Clarissa turned, walked back down the path, and paused at the gate. She looked back one last time. Roman was still there, carefully watering the roots of something that would outlast the season. He didn't look up, and Clarissa realized, for the first time, she wasn't the storm anymore. She was the weather that had passed. Clarissa made the reservation herself. She chose their old spot, linden and rye, the bistro with dim lighting, black and white photos on the walls, and the same piano track looping quietly through the speakers. It was where Roman took her on their second anniversary, back when she still let herself be surprised by small gestures. She booked the table for 4, a quiet booth in the back, under the portrait of the woman with the tilted hat. She sent out the invites with careful phrasing. Just dinner. Familiar faces, maybe a fresh start. She invited Roman, of course, Mia too, if only for witness, and Rachel, her sister. For history, for backup. Clarissa wore pearls. Not dramatic ones, but tasteful. The kind Roman used to buy for her in airport boutiques. She wore the navy silk blouse he'd always said made her look calm, collected. Her lipstick was the same neutral pink she wore the day they signed the mortgage. The whole look said, composed, regretful, evolved. She arrived 20 minutes early, told the hostess she was expecting 3 more. ordered a sparkling water with lemon, and then she waited. At 7:10, she checked her phone. No texts, no calls. She smoothed her skirt, practiced her expression in the reflection of her butter knife. She decided to open with something light, maybe a joke about hiking boots in divorce court. By 7:25, the hostess passed by again with a glance, clearly trying not to look concerned. At 7:41, Clarissa ordered wine, red. She made a face as she sipped it. Too acidic. She drank anyway. At 8:03, a waiter approached the table with a bottle in one hand and a small card in the other. "From a previous guest," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" He gestured to the unopened bottle in front of her. A Malbec, her least favorite. Clarissa turned the card over. It read, "Congratulations on starting over. A former tenant." Her breath caught. She set the card down slowly, the edges of her mouth tightening. No one else came. The table stayed set. 4 napkins, 4 water glasses, 4 untouched menus. The candle in the middle flickered uselessly, illuminating nothing. Clarissa sat alone in the booth she once called their favorite. She looked around the restaurant, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows with forgiveness, or maybe just recognition. But no one looked her way. No one whispered her name. There was no second chance. Just a dinner party for one. The wine stayed full. The seat across from her stayed empty. Roman hadn't ghosted her. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't even sent the wine himself. He had simply chosen not to show up, not to entertain the script, not to let her perform the version of herself where she was the gracious, misunderstood wife trying to hold it all together. Clarissa sat there long after the check had been paid, long after the waiter cleared the second untouched bread basket. She realized in that moment that this wasn't a step toward repair. It was a closing ceremony, a farewell party, and she was the only one invited. It was just past midnight when Clarissa found herself lying in Mia's guest bed, scrolling. Her suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner. The silk blouse from the dinner still hung over the back of a chair, limp and wrinkled. Her makeup had long faded, her earrings tucked in a teacup Mia used for Q-tips. The room was too quiet, too clean. She hated the silence now. It didn't flatter her anymore. She was deep in her feed, thumb numb from repetition. Likes, vacation photos, engagement posts, sponsored wellness content, all the usual noise. Her own profile had been suspiciously quiet since her return. She hadn't posted since the trek. She hadn't known what to say. And then, there he was, Morgan, laughing in a tagged photo she hadn't expected to see. Arms around a woman Clarissa didn't recognize. Tall, tan, glowing. They were in some upscale vineyard, holding those same stupid camping tin cups they used on the trip. The caption read, "To finding what fits." Clarissa sat up in bed, jaw tight. She zoomed in without realizing. The woman's hand rested on Morgan's chest, familiar, possessive. His other hand held the cup Clarissa had posed with, now engraved with something else entirely. She sent him a message before she could think. "Clarissa? Cute post. Guess I was the warm-up act?" No reply. She waited. Watched the scene status flicker on. Still nothing. Her next message came faster, a little sharper. "Clarissa. Guess some people move on quick." Still nothing. She called. Straight to voicemail. She stared at her screen, heart hammering. But it wasn't anger. Not entirely. It was something else. Something hollow. The kind of quiet you can't charm your way out of. The worst part wasn't Morgan moving on. The worst part was realizing she had never really been with him either. Not in any real way. Just another performance, another costume change, another stage set with wine and clever captions and men who told her she was luminous. She opened her own hiking post again. "Here's to never plateauing." She whispered it aloud, just to hear what it sounded like now. It didn't feel brave anymore. It felt like a eulogy. Clarissa set the phone down. Her reflection in the dark screen looked tired, older, like the filter had finally cracked. Roman hadn't burned her life down. He hadn't needed to. He'd simply walked away, deliberate, surgical, quiet. No big reveal, no final argument. Just an unflinching choice. And now the audience was gone. No more gasps, no more applause. Just the echo of her own voice in a room that never belonged to her. Clarissa closed the app. She was finally alone, and this time, no one was watching.